Sponsored. So the webinar today is the Smart Salting Strategy Winter Maintenance Contracts that reduce costs and protect liability. My name is Abby Heilman. I'm the Salt Watch Coordinator at the Isaac Walton League of America, and today we're joined by two really wonderful presenters, Jason Swope from the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council and Ben Rhoades from Reston Association. So we'll hear from both of those wonderful people here shortly, and I'm really excited to learn all of the tips and tricks that they have to say about this here today, too. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Isaac Walton League is one of the oldest conservation organizations in the United States. We are founded in 1922 by a group of hunters and anglers looking to conserve, restore, and promote the sustainable use and enjoyment of our natural resources, including soil, air, woods, waters, and wildlife. The Salt Watch program that I coordinate was launched in 2018 after there was a really large road salt spill outside of our national office headquarters in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And since that spill, we have been working to mobilize community scientists to monitor local waters for road salt pollution, or chloride specifically, which is the component of most of our road salt de-icers. And the goals of our Salt Watch program have been to raise awareness about the connection between salt and stream health, to identify hotspots or areas in need of further monitoring within our fresh waterways, and to advocate for smarter application of road salt by sharing the results of our programs with local and state agencies, with applicators, with property managers as well. So that's what we are here a little bit more to talk about today is, of course, salt. So winter can be a really, really challenging time for management. Not only are you trying to do all of your every single day today sort of events and things that you're doing, but you're trying to juggle your customer and resident expectations of the winter time on top of that, and you're trying to keep people safe. And of course, this can be really challenging, especially as we saw this past winter with the really extraordinary amount of snowfall that we received, and of course that snowcrete afterwards, which was next to impossible to remove for some of us. And so here during this webinar, we are here to give you information to really be able to make better decisions, decisions that can save you money, can protect the environment and your property from damages due to oversalting, and to keep your customers safe. We're trying to do all of this without sacrificing that safety component. And with salt, there are a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people think that more salt equals more melting, that you should feel that crunch underfoot as you're walking around. But really, just a little bit of salt is needed to stay safe during the winter time. This photo here on the left, that is way too much salt. We really don't need that amount of salt. All of that salt that were applied here, that's really just money out of your pocket. That will inevitably end up damaging the sidewalks and parking areas that you're trying to keep safe for folks in the winter. Whereas we only need a little bit of salt. This photo here on the right, those granules should be spaced out about 3 inches apart for proper melting. And Jason will talk about this as well. This is sort of a more zoomed out photo of the photo on the right in the last slide. Jason will talk about this later, but we do have a state training in Maryland that was developed by Maryland Department of the Environment for winter maintenance professionals. And that training is now going into, I believe it's 3rd year, and Maryland Department of the Environment has plans to list organizations on the website that have been trained in those salting best practices as well. So a great place to be able to find some of these applicators who are trained in these best management practices. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't tell you that everybody is dealing with some of these issues with snow and ice management. And that's why we're having this webinar here today. Even though the Isaac Walton League has been a leader in salt reductions, we have had issues with our own property managers, whether that is, or not property managers, but our winter maintenance professionals, whether that is sort of not communicating maybe as efficiently as we could. In these photos here, this was not this past winter, but 2 years ago. where we had a really bad ice event. We don't usually apply salt on most of our property, only one little bit of property we apply salt to. But since we had such icy conditions, our executive director at the time had told our winter maintenance professionals to use your discretion to apply salt. And this is what ended up happening. So because we had an event that really pushed the limits of our non-salting practices on our property, everybody sort of panicked, but this is something that could have been written into a contract, which is what Jason will talk about here in a little bit. And then this past winter, with the really extraordinary amounts of snowfall that we had a new applicator who came because our last one's retired. And um, the issue that we had is we actually had less parking spaces that are available. And you can kind of see that here in this photo. There should be some parking spaces right here to the right that were not plowed. And whether that was a miscommunication on our part, that's something that we can check in sort of after the event with our road salt applicators. But also, I think it's also worth, and Jason will talk about this too, we could have closed off certain parts of our parking area that might have been really difficult to plow during the winter time, and really had sort of like a trigger in our contract to say, hey, if we get an extraordinary snowfall or extraordinary ice event, then this is what we want to have happen on our property. So really making those expectations clear, but also to put this in the perspective that this does happen to everybody. We're all working through these things, and the more we sort of go through some of the processes of what it takes to actually put some of these contracts together, that's really, really important. And so the more we talk about these things, the better we'll all be at the end of the day. And it's not impossible to do. And it's something that a lot of people are just learning about. And that's what we're here today, is to give you the information to make these really good decisions. So I'm going to pass this over to Jason. Please, in the meantime, feel free to visit saltwatch.org for more information about our Saltwatch program. And then my email is there as well, saltwatch@iwla.org. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jason, and he is going to give us sort of the bulk of our presentation here today and talk a lot more about those contracts and the contract language that we should really be putting in place. So without further ado, Jason Swope.
All right. Thanks, Abby. Is everybody seeing my screen okay on your end?
It looks great.
All right. Very good here. Let me just adjust a couple of windows here. I think we're okay. All right. So as Abby said, really happy to be here today. My name's Jason Swope, and I work with the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council as the Maryland, DC, and West Virginia coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Program. And in that role, I help to train and certify landscape contractors and stormwater management professionals. Not just me, along with the entire CBLP team, but we work to train and certify contractors and stormwater management professionals about conservation landscaping and green stormwater infrastructure maintenance. And I'm also the lead instructor for the Maryland Department of the Environment's Smart Salting Smart Salting Enhanced Winter Maintenance Voluntary Certification Program. And today I'm going to talk about contracting with road salt applicators and how to hopefully incorporate some smart practices into our contracts that we're drawing up and working with when we're working with our contractors. So I'm just going to start by illustrating on a really small scale how ice melters can affect the bottom line for a property owner or property manager. This is an example on a property that I managed where the contractor had put down an excessive amount of ice melter right there at the building entrance going into the building. And so just that is an example on a small scale of over application, and that excessive salt got tracked into the building, and there was an additional efforts and costs in cleaning up that material that was tracked into the building entrance and into the elevators. And, that's a waste of material. And also, that's going to cost the contractor some time and money, because, they really should be required to come back and clean up those kind of excess applications and spills and over applications. And it's really important to kind of understand that it's not just the materials cost and the labor cost. There's also other associated costs with excessive ice melters. This is an example of a study that was done in 2017 by Fortin Consulting and Bolton and Mink, and they did research and found that they determined that the true financial cost of damages due to ice melters really goes far beyond the material and the labor cost, because of the corrosive nature of ice melters and salts. They can do a lot of damage to our property and infrastructure, and to our automobiles, to our vegetation and the environment. So as a whole, when you look at the cost on properties and the cost to the public, 1 ton of salt can be applied at a cost, for that salt of maybe $74 for the salt, plus some money cost to apply it. That total cost might be, $200 or $300 to apply that ton of salt. But the other damages that come along with that can, depending on the estimates and the process that you're looking at that to evaluate those damages, $300 worth of salt applied can, cause an additional $1,700 to $17,000 in damage and costs to property owners and the public. So that's why it's important to think about per application performance-based contracts. Payment for ice melter applications based on a per pound or a per ton cost can encourage over applications of ice melters at the expense of the customer, not only because of the materials themselves, but because of the long-term damages that can also be associated with ice melters. Also in 2017, the Snow and Ice Management Association surveyed their members, and they asked them, hey, under these conditions, under these temperature and weather conditions, can you look at your records and just be honest with us and tell us, what are your typical application rates for ice melters? What are you applying when you're out on your properties? And you can see that they reported back application rates on average in the 10 to 14 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And when you compare that to what a typical de-icing application rate recommendation would be, which is more in the 2 to 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet, you can see that there's a lot of over applications happening on our properties. And I'm not going to talk a lot about brine today, but I will just say that, if you then also just to take that a step further, if you look at what those pounds per acres that those application rates come out to, 400 to 600 pounds per acre, and if that a contractor is going out and applying that as a pre-treatment before a weather event, a smarter strategy would be to use something like a brine solution, liquid brine. When you apply that over that same acre of property at the recommended rate, the amount of salt that goes into that brine to be applied only comes out to about 100 pounds per acre. So you can see that there's a big difference in the way that we're currently doing a lot of management of our properties, and the way going forward by implementing smart salting practices, we can really work to reduce those amount of salts that are being applied while still maintaining that safety on the properties. So if you see these kind of excessive salt applications on your property or your roadways, your sidewalks, your parking lots, or you're seeing improperly stored ice melting materials on site, just think about what that damage of excessive ice melters, what that's causing to your infrastructure, and also the impact to aquatic life and plants and water quality as those salts run off, that snow and ice melts and those salts are carried away. Think about what that extra kind of damage to our ecosystem may be involved there with those ice melters. So applying at the correct rate can really help reduce the amount of excess chlorides that are entering into our environment. And it's really important to remember that once the ideal amount of ice melter is applied, adding additional ice melter to that area isn't going to melt the snow or ice any faster. So when you kind of take all these things into consideration, I think you can see why it's really important for us to be reducing the amount of ice melters applying, still maintaining some public safety, but we want to do that in a manner. We can do that by kind of implementing some smart salting practices in the way that we apply, and also specifying them into our contracts. We really want to incorporate smart salting best practices into our snow removal contracts. And in those contracts, that should include pricing models that are based on a per application price rather than relying more on the per pound or per ton model for pricing. And so this is really going to require some discussion with your contractor. You should encourage them to attend some sort of winter maintenance training so that they understand what smart salting best practices are and how that they can incorporate into their services. And that'll lead to being able to have good conversations with them about how to incorporate these practices into a contract. And so these are a list of a couple of different types of smart salting practices that we can do. The ones that I've highlighted are kind of the things that I'm going to try to talk about today here in the next 10 or 15 minutes of my presentation. So let's just talk a little bit about site planning, because what we really need to do is we need to develop a plan long before we get to this situation. We don't want to be thinking about it now when the weather's occurring. We want to develop a plan in the off season prior to the snow and ice season, and we want to use this plan to help to guide that snow and ice management team. And that this plan should be included as an exhibit with your contract. And so you want to make sure that there's a lot of things that you can incorporate into your plan, but the key things I think are that you're showing what the primary and secondary and tertiary areas are of the property. What's the most important things that we need to stay on top of and really be proactive in removal and managing snow and ice? And what are the areas that we can let go until the storm's over and just touch them at the end of a weather event so that we're not repeatedly removing the snow and ice and applying ice melters? And we want to identify our areas and what the application rates are for those areas. We want to think about drainage on our property and how the water's flowing and how we can prevent that melting and refreeze. And we can do that by kind of understanding where we're going to be pushing and piling snow. And we're also, if we're storing salt on property, we want to have that also indicated on our site plan and in our contract. So just real quickly, this is just an example. If you are managing a large property, it may be that you can have a permanent storage facility on your property to store ice, and you might be using something like the bin with the cover over it in the top image. As a contractor, I was often using the bottom image there, and we would store our salts on property in a container. We would have those delivered to the site, and we would be able to then move those into the container, and they'd stay dry and protected all winter long. So that's an additional cost. That's something that as a contractor, I need to be aware of, and I need to be thinking about what those costs are and how I would incorporate them into my pricing for my snow contract. And there's just some language there. You want to include this language in your contract. Salt will be stored on an impervious surface such as concrete or asphalt. It'll be in a predetermined area agreed upon by the property owner or management representative. See attached site map for the indicated salt storage area. Salt piles will always be covered with a waterproof material that's properly weighed down and secured. Just a really good example of the kind of language that you should be thinking about incorporating into your contract. You might want to also think about areas of your property that you could close during a winter weather event. Think about what areas are high risk. Are there extra building entrances? Again, we're trying to think about ways that we can avoid that constant removal and reapplication of materials and removal and reapplication. This is just a really good example on a property that I worked on with that surface lot there that's shown in red. During a winter weather events, the property managers could choose. They have the entire parking garage. That's where most people park. The surface lot is convenience, but there's handicap spots for parking in that parking garage right at ground level. During a winter weather event, they may choose to just close this lot off altogether and just wait until the weather event's over. Use the parking garage and the covered areas then do one removal at the end. And that's going to cut down on our labor and our material usage and costs. So here's a really basic site map, right? And it does convey some good information. We know I've got some black arrows on there and some X's where we're going to pile the snow. And I've got something that shows kind of the priority for the sidewalk areas. But beyond that, there isn't really any information about where to store salt on the property, how big those areas are, the sidewalks and parking lots. No square footage, no real guidance on how much should be applied in those areas. So what we really need to do, either you as a property manager or owner that's writing an RFP, a request to send out to contractors, or if you're working with a contractor and they've been on the property, this is something that you might ask them to do and let them know that this is what you want to start incorporating into your contracts. And they can use tools like Google Earth, and we can take our property, we can start to identify our parking lot areas. We can use tools to measure those areas off to give us our square footage of those areas. We can identify here. You can see we've also done the same thing for the sidewalks. We've got our primary yellow, our secondary red, and our tertiary blue sidewalk areas. And when we do these measurements, the software platform is going to give us our square footages, and we're going to be able to kind of then determine our application rates, right? So we can also identify our storage location, and we can show graphically with these black arrows I've shown, hey, we know how the water drains, and this is the areas and the directions in general that we want to push the snow, and these are the areas that we want to pile them up and off of the parking lot into the grass areas. In this case, we know that this is going to really help prevent a lot of that free melting and refreezing and runoff that causes us to come back and do more ice melter applications. There are other software platforms available beyond Google Earth. I've used a 10 of in the past, really reasonable cost. There's other platforms, Aspire, Site Recon, Go, iPave, are all software platforms that can do a lot of these site measurements and takeoffs for you. One thing I really like about this particular platform is that it separates out my parking spaces from my drive aisles. And there are going to be times during the day when there's a winter weather event and your property's open for business, and you may not be able or need to apply ice melter to the entire property. You may just want to do parking lot drive lanes and main drive aisles. And so knowing the difference in those areas and tailoring a ice melter application specifically for those areas in that kind of application and outlining that in your contract can be an important way to manage costs, set expectations, and help reduce the overall amount of salt that you're applying while still maintaining that safety. So, once we have this kind of site plan in place, then we can start to incorporate that into the contract. And I'll just say, winter weather is unpredictable. And so winter maintenance work is often, because of that reason, performed on a time and materials basis. We can't always know. A 1-inch storm that could last a couple of hours, or it could drag on for the entire course of a day. And so it can make it really challenging to kind of predict how much it's going to cost to remove snow for any given weather event. So it wouldn't be out of the ordinary, and it's probably fairly typical that we would see a lot of our snow removal operations kind of quantified and specified to be billed and paid for on a time and materials rate. So an hourly rate for the truck and the operator and the salt spreader. And in this example, we've also have per pound pricing for our salt and for our bagged sidewalk calcium chloride material. Ice melter applications, on the other hand, are predictable, right? We know what our areas are, and we know what kind of materials we're using. And so what we're saying is that this needs to become a collaborative effort between your contractor and your property manager. You need to determine these proper application rates, and then the material cost, equipment costs, labor costs they're going to all be needed to be determined and discussed in a real transparent and honest conversation. Your contractor's going to need, if we're going to switch from this per pound model to a per application, your contractor is really going to need to rethink, how they charge for applications by not only including those costs of materials and the labor, but to think about the overhead costs involved with staging materials, storing the materials, the site planning that we're talking about, the equipment maintenance, employee training, so that they're understanding smart salting practices. These are all costs that you can kind of determine ahead of time and figure out how to include them into your pricing, so that you kind of develop a readiness cost or a mobilization cost. And then you can include that cost in with each property and application that you do, so that what you're doing is you're determining, hey, this is how much it's going to cost to come out to the property and do the ice melter application. And we're going to make sure that we're covering our overhead in this mobilization cost. And then we'll add on to that cost of the ice melters based on realistic application rates. Here's a 1.5 pound, a 2.25, 3 pound per 1,000 square feet rate. And these are all determined through our de-icing application rate chart. So once we know the areas of our property, and once we know these application rates, we can kind of pick out a light, a medium, and a heavy application rate, and we can develop those costs based on that, and we can quantify them. We can include them right in the contract, so that every area has every parking lot has a fixed price per application. And if it's a warm day and we're only going to get light precipitation, we would choose then to do a light application rate. And we have a cost associated with that includes that mobilization fee and all of the overhead into it. If it's a really cold day, it's going to be 20 degrees and we're going to get some extra weather, or it's currently snowing, we may need to go on the heavier application rate. But you've defined those rates and you've set the expectations to the contractor about what you want to see, and we know what it's going to cost. And then it becomes on the contractor to manage those applications and to apply them at the correct manner. You've set your costs, and what you're saying is it's up to you to manage that and apply them at the right rate. And if you over apply, not only could I possibly make you come back and clean that up, but now the over application is not something that I'm paying for. It's something that's going to come out of the contractor's pocket, and that's going to really motivate them to kind of move forward in the right manner when we have these fixed prices. There's a lot of language that you would want to include in your contract. The QR code and the reference resources that we'll provide after this webinar this is language from the Wisconsin Saltwise website. They have model contracts and a lot of language in there where that you can use as templates. You're going to recognize that there's implications to using chlorides in the environment, or using de-icing, or using traction agents like sand. And you're going to kind of specify what the best practices are that you want your contractor to do. And you're going to include in your contract samples of record keeping forms that you can use, so that you all can agree upon what's the correct way to record these applications. These application records are really important in case there is a slip and fall. One of the big challenges we see in the crunch under the feet that Abby was talking about earlier is because we're all concerned about liability. And we feel like if we oversalt, that's giving us extra protection, but we know that it's having a lot of implications in our environment. So we want to be mindful of that and keeping good application records throughout the process, and providing these templates and use them as examples in your contract is a really important to implement. In New Hampshire, they actually have passed legislation that will protect contractors and property managers from liability lawsuits if they are, if they go through the certified Green Snow Pro training that the state of New Hampshire has provides, and they are showing that they're not being negligent, but that they're recognizing and utilizing salt management practices in their contracts. And as long as they're doing their due diligence and responding to the property's needs and applying ice melters when needed, but at the correct rates, it will give them some liability protection. So we see that as a model in New Hampshire that maybe in time could be utilized in other states. What we would want to do now in our contracts with our contractors is we would want to have some language in there that we're giving the contractor the go-ahead to apply and use these best management practices. But, you know, we're not setting the expectation up that we're going to have bare pavement and dry pavement and at all times. It needs to be understood that when we're using our smart salting practices and we're applying at these proper rates, there could still be some residual snow and ice on the property at certain times. And we need to make sure that we kind of recognize that in our contracts and maybe this is the language from the Wisconsin Saltwise contract model language. Owner will not claim that the contractor has violated or breached this contract by giving consideration to pollutant or public infrastructure impacts in its ice management materials and methods through practicing salt best practices, unless contractor has deviated substantially from the best practices. So we're saying we want you to use these practices, and we recognize that they're not always perfect, but if we can remove early and often, apply at the recommended rates, work together in partnership, we should be able to maintain safety on our property, reduce chlorides, save some costs, and remove that incentive for over application. But we just need to kind of also understand that it may not be perfect all the time. And even under over application scenarios, we still don't usually have perfect property all the time. This is something that I wrote up, just kind of thinking how I might write it also. And, you know, we're recognizing that we're going to be using practices at the recommended application rates to break the bond between the ice and the pavement, but we don't guarantee bare and dry pavement at all times. Some snowpacker slush is a natural byproduct of sustainable salt management and does not constitute a breach of the standard of care. Just examples of the kind of language that we want to put into our contracts as we're implementing these practices. So again, you can find those on those examples of model snow and ice policies and model contracts on the Wisconsin Saltwise website. And I think also Maggie is putting those links into the chat, and we'll share those out with you as well. Another thing that you can do beyond developing these site plans and then making sure that your contractor is following those application rates is you as a property manager, you know, we need to develop a plan and then evaluate and come back and talk to the contractor about what they're doing right, what they can do a better job of. You know, and so there are evaluation sheets. This one's from the Maryland Department of the Environment's Smart Salting Enhanced Winter Maintenance Training Manual. And this is just as a sheet where you could walk the property with your contractor and evaluate how they're doing. If fewer than 8 practices are checked, encourage your contractor or crew to attend a smart salting training. So we need to, you know, hold our contractors accountable. It's not just putting it on paper. It's also, you know, making sure that we're doing these things in the real world. And it's not always about just how much salt that we're applying. It's about calibrating our equipment, you putting it down at the right patterns and not in clumps. It's coming back and sweeping up afterwards. It's doing that removal early and often. You know, those are all practices that go along with proper application rates. And property managers also have responsibilities. They should be sharing this information with their tenants and staff. Flexibility in adjusting hours of operation can really be helpful. It's kind of unrealistic if it stops snowing at 6 o'clock in the morning to expect that your contractor is going to have the property 100% safe at 7 o'clock in the morning. Signage can be really useful. We talked a little bit about low use areas that could be closed and drainage issues. So it's a combination of, it's not all on the contractor and it's certainly not all on the property owner or manager, but this needs to be kind of a collaborative process that you work through together. And it won't happen the first year. I think these are things, what we want to do is we want to develop a plan and follow that plan, document the plan, make sure that the billing is working out right and we're applying at the right rates, use those evaluation sheets, review the plans, update the plans, and it becomes a continual process. And that's really what we want to work toward as property managers, working in collaboration with our contractor. So I'm going to wrap up here in just a minute or two. I just want to remind everyone that Maryland, there are a couple of really good resources that we can use. The Maryland Department of the Environment on their webpage has a document that kind of lists a lot of the things that I've been talking about here, what to look for when hiring a winter weather maintenance professional and what you want to include in your contract. This is a really good document that kind of summarizes a lot of what we've been talking about. So those resources are available on the Maryland Department of the Environment's website. Wisconsin SaltWise website has them. Other states probably have these as well. These are the ones that I'm aware of, and we'll share those links out with you. We'll also make sure that you have a link to the Enhanced Winter Maintenance Training Manual that the Maryland Department of the Environment has developed. They worked in cooperation with the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin here in Maryland, and they've developed this Winter Maintenance Training Manual. A lot of the information that I've conveyed to you today and the charts and some of the graphs, that's from this training manual, and that's available as a free download. And that's a good step that you can take in the right direction to becoming a better property owner that's more responsible and engaging with your contractor on these smart salting practices. There's also good information in there about writing these contracts and implementing the contracts and the kind of language and the tips that we talked a little bit about today. And lastly, I'll say that, if you're in the Maryland region, we're in year 4 now of our smart salting enhanced winter maintenance training, and we would love to see more property managers and contractors in the room. And this QR code will provide this link also. It'll take you to a page where you can sign up for more information to be made aware of when the next round of these smart salting trainings and voluntary certification programs are going to be available. And, I would encourage you, if you're a property manager and you have large sites, multiple properties, you're working with them, this would be a great opportunity to attend this training together, property manager and contractor. It's going to create a real feeling of transparency and honesty, and you're going to be talking about the same things, and you're going to be understanding together collaboratively what smart salting is and why it's important to develop these per occurrence pricing models instead of per application rates, and why this language in the contract is important. So these training opportunities in the Maryland region will be coming up, and there are probably I know Pennsylvania is working toward programs, and I think a lot of other jurisdictions are working to develop these kind of training programs that can get everybody in the room, and we can talk about these practices and start to implement them out on our sites. And with that, I think I'll hold off on any questions till the end here. Thanks so much for your time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass things over to Ben.
Hey there, folks. Thanks so much, Jason. If you see me glancing out my window, it's because the sky just opened up out here in Reston. But here I am. Here's my slides. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about sort of the homeowners association experience in trying to navigate smart salting contracting. Tell you a little bit about the Reston Association and how we've worked through this a bit. and how we're kind of messaging out to our sub associations. So for those of you on the call who might not be familiar with Reston Association, we are a large scale homeowners association in Northern Virginia. You can see the numbers here. We're huge, 21,000 plus households, 65,000 residents. Within the association, we have nearly 200 sub-associations. So those are anything from a single family home neighborhood of, 10 to 15 houses to 20, 30, 40 plus townhomes in a sub-association to condo buildings. They really run the gamut. And so we work closely with our sub-associations to help them be the best managers of their property that we can. And since about 2023, we've been really involved in this concept of smart salting. Even before then, we host a Virginia Save Our Streams program here in Reston for stream monitoring. And so when the Winter Salt Watch program got kicked off, we also joined that. And then, once we really realized we do have an issue with over chlorination or chloride pollution of our streams, we started trying to do some outreach. Just a little bit about, our role here in Reston as an association. Folks trust us as a community leader, a source of expert knowledge. We have a bit of more flexibility in our operations than, say, a municipality might be. Reston in particular, we have very environmentally minded residents. We are a planned community that was sort of planned around an ideal of environmental protection. And that is very much a through line with our operations. And we have that close connections. Same time, there are some challenges that we have here. And in particular, something I want to highlight are the sort of ever-changing stakeholders that we have to deal with, right? Sub-association boards, we call them clusters. So if I say that, that's what I mean there. Those boards turn over, community managers, property managers that might be from a private company turnover. And so, we're constantly having to navigate that situation. And just a touch on here about why the Reston Association hires me, a watershed manager, and why we care about this. We have 4 lakes that we're really interested in protecting. You can see here, it's a little bit hard to see through the transparent Reston overlay, but you can see some green here. A lot of our stream valleys are what is our Reston Association common property, and so protecting those streams is really important to the community. So what we do for outreach, we do our best to essentially get the message out that Abby and Jason have already shared. We've done that through community sessions where we invite cluster leaders in and talk with them about the importance of smart salting. NVRC, the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, helps our region with salt policy. We actually have the first in our state in Fairfax County. It's not a watershed here in Reston, but Acton Creek has a total maximum daily load of a pollution diet for salt. And so our region is really engaged in smart salting outreach and coordination. We put out articles, videos regularly. So if you're looking for some inspiration about, what an association can do to help get the word out, feel free to check out our YouTube page or our Facebook page. You'll find some salting videos there. And this is our message to our homeowners associations, to those leaders of those clusters and sub-associations. We focus more so on the economic impacts maybe for that association. Obviously, these small associations are cost conscious. They have tight budgets. They don't want to raise their dues or have special assessments for things like landscaping damage, repaving, especially sidewalk damage that salt can cause on fresh sidewalk or asphalt, or if they have metal drainage pipes. Those can really get damaged by the corrosion of salt. And so really trying to make that message clear to the sub-associations so that they're investing the time that it is worth to negotiate with their contractors about smart salting. So this is a little bit of, a bit of what Jason was just talking about. The message to homeowners associations being that you can make a difference, right? If you join your HOA board, if you're on your HOA board, you can really start trying to have those negotiations with landscaping contractors who are typically the same folks that are the winter maintenance contractors, right? So these folks who have just a few acres maybe of common space that they have a mow and blow crew, as I call them, come through and do their maintenance. Those are typically the same folks that are coming and doing some plowing and salting in the winter. And so trying to have those conversations. But on the flip side, can we make a difference, right? So this has been our message, right? You can make a difference since about 2024, trying to get folks to start negotiating with their contractors and sharing out some of these resources that Jason has shared here today. But in the last couple of years, our first sub-associations to try to take this message to their contractors have been met with some resistance. Contractors saying that, that's just not how we operate. We won't adopt these things into our contract. And it's been a little bit discouraging for these folks that were excited and like you all might be really excited to, we have a simple solution, right? Get your contract language updated. It takes a little bit more work and finesse with the contractors sometimes. So I really loved Jason's recommendation of inviting them to trainings, events like this, or if you're in Maryland, that smart salting training. If you can find a contractor in Northern Virginia that has attended that, that would be great. But the things that we're really looking for in Reston now as we move forward are really continuing this message, right? Just keep working at it, keep having those conversations every time the contract comes up for renewal, likely around this time of year or even earlier, because it's going to be the same contract that you're using for that landscaping work throughout the year. So trying to think about these things as soon as possible so that you're not regretting not having mentioned it, when November rolls around and we're having our first freezing rains. And then also complementing smart salting when it's observed. So kind of what Jason was mentioning where, really kind of inspect the work of the contractor, get those site plans and hold the contractor to them. Whenever you see smart salting, make sure that you're mentioning that not just to the contractor, but also to folks like us, to Abby, Jason, myself, as you are in this sort of property management world or environmental protection. I saw some folks from a lake association on this. As you see these good behaviors being performed, make sure that you're sharing that out so that more, homeowners associations, property managers can contract with folks that are doing good, and we can really provide that economic incentive for folks to continue doing those best practices. And the last point here is kind of Fairfax County specific, but Fairfax County has incorporated some smart salting language into their custodial contracts this year or this past year for certain buildings, for sidewalks outside those buildings. And they're evaluating kind of the performance of that updated contract language. And hopefully we'll be seeing here this coming year some, as they expand that language into different contracts that they have for different sorts of facilities. We'll learn about what contractors Fairfax County is using that are amenable to this language and their behavior within that contract language. So really kind of looking ahead, really excited about that, excited about larger regional contractors starting to get onto the MDE smart salting training and moving forward. So that's really all I had. I just kind of wanted to provide a bit of a status update here for how this is all going for us homeowners associations as we're navigating the same issue, and as I'm hearing from especially our smaller associations that are more representative of what what an HOA kind of throughout the region typically looks like. But my email is on here, my phone number is on. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. If any of you all are Restonians, feel free to stop by my office and say hi, and I'm happy to scheme with you on how we can, get what we want out of these salting contracts. So with that, I will pop my slides off the screen here, and I think Abby and Maggie might help us navigate some questions.
Absolutely. Huge thank you, Jason and Ben, both of you for being here today. I'm glad we didn't have any power outage issues for the bulk of the webinar, so that's great. Hopefully we will maintain that status through some of these questions here today. And if we don't get to all of the questions here by the end of this webinar, we can definitely email some of the answers out at the end. So I'm going to start with some of the chat. Please, if you have some more questions, put those in the Q&A and we'll get to those here in a moment. So there's a couple questions that I answered already. Where did the recommended application rate come from? And do contractors offer brine application? The application rate guidelines you can find on page 114 of the MDE training manual. So I posted the link there. And then, Jason, I don't know if you know if there's like a certain percentage of folks who have been offering brine. I know that as brine is one of the best management practices to use, especially for applying like ahead of storm events. If you're noticing more and more people are using brine application as an option for the contractors.
Yes, absolutely. The organization that I worked with before I took my current position, we bought a brine applicator, and we had a good winter that year. I'll say good in the fact that for a contractor, there were a lot of weather events. But that particular organization already had a large number of properties. They were already doing a lot of granular pretreatment. The combination of multiple contracts and multiple weather events during that year, they were able to figure out what their mobilization costs were, and they were able to recover the cost of that brine applicator in 1 year. And yes, we are seeing many more contractors implementing brine. And I'll use this as an opportunity just to say that the driving force behind contractors to make the investment and to learn how to use brine or to implement smart salting practices, it really comes from the people that are attending this webinar today, right? If the contractors are going to be, if we're asking them for these services and requesting them and insisting that they do these practices and attend this training and become certified, then we're going to see them do that, right? So there's good motivation. Brine applications use less salt. That's great for everybody, and they typically cost less than a granular application. But guess what? The contract, they're more profitable because it takes way less time, and a brine truck can cover a lot more territory in one round of trips than what a granular salt applicator can. So there's a way to make this work where we can implement these practices, reduce costs for the customer, but still maintain profitability for the contractor. And brine applicators is one strategy that works well to do that.
Another question. So large apartment buildings here. Our village green committee tried to get managers to follow safe salt guidelines, but they were most worried about residents slipping, hurting themselves, and then blaming or suing the building owner. And of course, this is in Maryland, so we don't have the New Hampshire Green Snow Pro program here. The question is there any way that they can be held harmless in a lawsuit if they follow county and state safe salt guidelines?
That's a good question. I can't say that you could guarantee that there couldn't be accusations of liability. But I will say, in my experiences, having had to go down and dig those records up from 4 years prior because there was a slip and fall on the property, and we were ultimately not found responsible for that slip and fall. The conversation is rarely about how much material was applied. It's almost always about, were you diligent? Did you keep good application records? Were you there in a timely manner? Did you maintain it during a continual weather event? And I think there isn't any liability protection in Maryland. But I think as a contractor and property manager, you can really stack the odds in your favor by really good, accurate record keeping is probably the best defense against that. And the science is there that extra ice melter doesn't melt ice any faster. So we really need to think about implementing and doing these practices. And the record keeping component of it is a big part of protection from liability.
Another question for Jason. Realistically, do property managers, particularly those with large properties, have an alternative to salt and salt brine?
Only smart salting strategies, right? If we need to keep our property safe, this is at the end of the day, this is a chemistry project, right? It's the way salts in solution reduce the freezing point of water. And so salts are one of the things, and really one of the only things that are effective at doing that. So there is research, and there are ongoing research in alternatives to salts as ice melters. But I think for us as an industry, salts are the main component of ice melting.
This next question I can answer. Does DC have any good programs through DOEE, which is the Department of Energy and Environment? I did have a conversation with some folks from DOEE last year. They were talking about doing a DC smart salting pilot program. I don't have any more information on that right now, but it looks like they are trying to start something there, which is really awesome. Question for Ben. Does Reston offer indemnification for those contractors who follow smart salting? And
Yeah.
also, oh, okay. And also Ben did put his email in the chat there too. So sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I had thrown an answer into the chat about this one, but it's my understanding as a homeowners association, that's not really our place to offer that kind of indemnification. That's really between those private parties there in that dispute. But we certainly follow those best practices that have been set forth by the county and state around us. And so in part, that is us keeping an eye on Fairfax County as they get more creative with their implementation of smart salting techniques and get as we move towards implementation of this TMDL.
And somebody from DOE is actually on this webinar right now. They are working still on that DC Smart Salting pilot program. So they're working to get that off the ground. So that's really, really awesome that is still in play. Another question for Jason. Do your recommended contracts have a clause in there requiring contractors to come back and clean up excess applications?
That's definitely smart salting best management practices to clean up spills and over applications. And I think that would be good to include in your contract, that they could be required to come back and certainly clean up spills. And I think also, if you have the contractor go through the experience of trying to sweep up and clean up excessive salt applications in a parking lot or sidewalks, and sidewalks is where we see it on parking lots. We really see it in sidewalk areas. Once they go through the process of the expense of sending a crew back out the next day after they've all gone home, and then they've come back to have to go out and do cleanup after a weather event, that's coming out of their pocket. I think that's going to help. Change their behavior in how they're applying salt, because then the salt's coming out of their pocket plus the additional cost for cleanup. So I'd recommend including that in a contract, the cleanup clause.
Another question for Jason. When walking parking lots on days after a storm, there always seems to be a lot more excessive salting in parking spaces versus drive aisles. Do you normally apply the same quantity of material in parking and driving areas? And I also might be able to take a quick crack at this. I would say that in a lot of cases, especially if you're using the granular salt, it tends to bounce on application and also as vehicles are driving by. So that might be part of the reason why it looks like there's more salt in the parked areas rather than the driven through areas. But the question again is, do you normally apply the same quantity of material in parking and driving areas?
So I would say it's a good question and good observation. And I would say that you would apply it at the same rate in the parking spaces that you would in the drive aisles. What can typically happen with parking spaces is they're occupied during the day. People clear their snow and ice off of the cars. They leave for the day. The contractor comes back in at night when the parking lot's empty. And then maybe they've been able to keep the drive aisles safer during the day, but now they've got the empty parking lot and they're doing that last cleanup. And then they're putting that final salt application down and they're doing that at 3 o'clock in the morning. So things are ready for 7 o'clock in the morning. And that's where you get a lot of over applications, right? So there are other strategies that they can employ to help reduce or make their ice melters more effective, smart salting practices. But that would be, I've definitely seen that. And I've also seen, it seems like for whatever reason, handicap parking spaces seem to always get twice the amount of salt as any other parking spot on the property. And, it's good intentions, but not necessarily the best results. The ice and snow isn't going to melt any faster with that extra salt in the handicap spot as it is anywhere else. But there are challenges with those parking spaces. And I think a lot of it is that final cleanup and that final application especially can tend to be a heavier application. They want to get that down and get done for the morning or the night and kind of go home and get some rest after working some long days. And that's where you can start to see the temptation to turn that application rate up. And at this time of year, we're getting toward the end of the season. You may have some contractors that are motivated just to use up the salt that they have on the property because there's an expense associated with hauling that away at the end of the year. So those are other things that you need to think about and why things that might be leading to some of those over applications.
And we are at time. There are a couple more questions, Ben and Jason, if you guys are willing to stay on to answer some of those.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. If anybody needs to head off, totally understand. Um, Another question in the Q&A. The Boston Globe ran an article last week about the benefits of mixing dead starfish remains with salt. The results shared were impressive, almost too good to be true. Any insight? I can start us off and say that I don't know that that's the most sustainable thing to probably put on sidewalks and parking lots. I actually haven't seen that article, but I did see something, I think, a year or so ago about that. I would be a little bit skeptical, as I am for any alternative that people put out there, frankly. But yeah, I don't know how sustainable something like that would be to use a creature as part of our salt application. I don't
Right.
know if
That's a
either
good
of you have
point.
heard of this.
I haven't heard of starfish, but that's interesting. And I would say it's a traction agent, just like sand or other materials that we might use. And I think that, in extreme conditions, when the weather and when the temperatures are so cold that we can't even have effective ice melter usage, we might, in some cases, in spot areas, be using some sort of attraction agent. And maybe for whatever reason in the Boston area, there's an abundance of starfish shells. I don't know. That's interesting. But the point is, it's a traction agent. And the thing that I would say is that we need to be cognizant of the fact that this stormwater then often is running into practices that are designed to filter and treat stormwater, not so that it's not going directly into the watershed. And that's great. But those traction agents, sand and other things, they can clog and cause problems with those stormwater practices, or with things like permeable pavement and pavers. They can clog the pores and the spaces between the pavers, and they cease to function then. So there's always a trade-off with every practice that we do. I haven't heard of starfish, but I think we just need to be aware and understand that those materials can have other negative effects in the watershed or in our stormwater practices.
Okay, I think this is probably more of a question for me, and then Ben, I know you guys do a lot of monitoring too, if you wanted to answer any or further answer this question. How is groundwater monitored to determine the effect of chlorides on the water supply? So here in Maryland, where our office is in Gaithersburg, our water supply is actually surface waters, not groundwater. Everybody has different water supplies depending on where you're at. Some people might have more surface waters, others groundwaters. You should figure out where your water's coming from because that's really, really important in being able to then protect those water supplies from things like road salt pollution. You can actually monitor your water with our Salt Watch kits. You can go to saltwatch.org and request a free kit, and we'll send those out to whatever address you supply us with, as long as it's within the United States. And you can actually get started monitoring for free. All you need is a quick little water sample, and it takes less than 10 minutes to start monitoring. Our water suppliers, they do monitor for salt on a regular basis as well, because they're required to remove it once it gets to a certain level. So feel free to check out our website, saltwatch.org, or at the cleanwaterhub.org to see some of those results. And if Ben, if you had any more insight about monitoring, please feel free to share.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll just quickly add about monitoring, because Abby touched on just about everything, is that part of surface water, drinking water sources, oftentimes, in Northern Virginia, that's coming from the Potomac, but in some instances in Maryland and Virginia, that could be coming from a reservoir. And you might be able to be someone to kind of start raising an alarm with your reservoir operator regarding chloride in the reservoir. One of the interesting things, obviously with salt, is that saline solution is denser than fresh water, and so that saline solution is accumulating at the bottom of the reservoir, and is as there's more saline water, that kind of chemical stratification, for lack of a better word, in the reservoir changes. So if this is all to say, if you are monitoring in a lake, a pond, a reservoir, make sure that you get equipment that can take water from the lower levels of that water body, and get those waters all the way up into your testing equipment. And most of our drinking water authorities are doing this around us. But just if you're curious about testing a lake or pond, I know Asphalt League just issued some guidance on how to do that, how to best do that. We're doing that here in Reston with our lakes and ponds as we kind of track this sort of salinization of our fresh water.
Another question for Jason. Can you say more about how property managers can address the complexities of weather-related best practices in a contract while avoiding giving too many details and perhaps being unworkable in the end? For example, some weather events start out as snow and ice, but then end up as rain, so the ice melt can get washed into storm drains and end up in our waterways. Thank you for your guidance.
Yes, so I think one of the main things we can do when working with our contractors is make sure that they're referring to those application rates, and that they understand that not all ice melter applications are equal. And that's really the point of the chart that I briefly shared on the screen, and the idea behind the light, the medium, or heavy or salt application rates in your contract is because we are going to want a smart salting practice would be to apply the amount of material needed to meet the pavement, temperature, and weather conditions. So that changes. If it's 28 degrees and warming up, we might apply at 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. If it's If it's 23 degrees and getting colder, we're going to apply at a completely different application rate. And that's what the chart is for, is to help us determine those rates based on those weather conditions. And it's not a perfect science. We're not always going to get it exactly right, but the key is to develop that plan and to follow it routinely. And as you do that, then your experiences and knowledge about it's going to change over to rain, or it's going to start as rain, so we can't put brine down before the weather event because it just gets washed away. Those kind of practices, as you get more experience with them and doing them, they become more intuitive. But again, I think attending some sort of certification or training webinar or classroom to help point these kind of strategies out and the pitfalls and the things we want to avoid, and then developing that plan and following that plan and kind of completing the circle of reevaluating is a really important part of the process.
And I did put, I know Ben needs to get going here in a second, so I did put the link to learn a little bit more about the winter maintenance training program from Maryland Department of the Environment in the chat there.
Excellent.
So if you're interested
Yes.
in signing up for the program or participating in the program, you can find out more there. I know one question asked about what the rate is for the training program. I don't know that they've released those numbers for this year. But you can always contact Natalia Sanchez, who's the program manager at the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center, that hosts the training program on their website. And her contact is at that link as well. I know there's a couple more questions that are in the chat. Let me see. And Ben, if you have to head out, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. And like y'all saw my email there in the chat. If you have a question for me, please feel free to reach out. But everybody have a safe, good day and a safe afternoon.
Thanks, Ben. Do the same. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Great job.
A couple quick other questions.
Sure.
One from Bill Burke. I did some weather research for the Gaithersburg zip code for over the last 10 years. On average, the number of days with temperatures under 32 degrees for more than 2 hours and more than 3 inches of precipitation was down 55% over the period. Is there anyone maybe with a more technical background doing similar analyses that might be converted into rules for salting that reflect climate changes? I'm not aware of anyone doing those analyses that I'm connected with, but I would say as far as like how much salt folks should apply, that's more based on the event at that particular time, which is where people are following those application rates, like the ones that are referenced in the Smart Salting Manual. Jason, I don't know if you know of anyone else who's tracking some of those sort of climate changes that are occurring.
Well, I will say, some contractors and some property managers and owners prefer kind of a fixed seasonal cost. And so we do have situations where contractors are really looking back at what the history is over the years, because what they're trying to do is kind of develop an idea of what an average winter is like, so that if they're going to engage in a fixed price contract, that wouldn't be a 1-year contract. It'd be a kind of a multiple year contract, but they're looking closely to kind of average those weather events out and see what they are. And climate change, it is having an effect on our weather events in the wintertime. And I'm only speaking from my own personal experience. It seems like we have here in the Mid-Atlantic region a lot more of those mixed precipitation days where, yes, it's not really definitively cold and going to be snow. It's going to be right on the borderline where, is it going to snow? Is it not going to snow? Is it going to be freezing rain? Is it going to be sleet? And those can be some of the most challenging weather events to manage. I do feel like we are seeing maybe less of this year's not maybe the best example, but less of those colder, intense, high accumulation precipitation events and more of those mixed precipitation events. But peppered in with them seem to be these occasional really extreme accumulations. So I think we see kind of the swings in the weather to maybe when it does really, when the conditions are right, we do get a lot of snow and ice. And we don't get as many of those, but they come along. But we see more and more in between those events, kind of that mixed precipitation, which oftentimes those kind of mixed precipitation events that take an entire day to occur, you end up oftentimes we'll use more ice melter material on those than we do something that accumulates a lot of snow, where we get to the point where we're just clearing the material and waiting till the end to apply any materials at all. So it's a good question. And I'm not sure, I think everybody's looking at what our patterns are, and thinking about how to respond to them. But it really comes down to each weather event and situation, as Abby said, is going to require its own assessment and its own application rate based on the weather conditions and the temperatures and the pavement conditions.
Two more questions for you, Jason. How do you include the environmental costs of salt application? Or
In a
maybe
snow contract?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some wording in there. That's a really good question. I think that you would one of my slides had some wording that recognizes it doesn't necessarily throw dollar amounts out there, but it recognizes what the impacts of chlorides are on the environment and their corrosive nature to infrastructure and property damage. And so I think as a general statement within the contract, to kind of lay out why you want your contractor to implement these practices, it would be good to kind of recognize what those impacts are, so that so you're kind of laying the groundwork for why we want you to follow this. And that's really, I think that's what it's going to take. If the contractor's happy with their profitability and how they've been doing things business as usual over the past 5 or 10 years on the property, they're not going to be inclined to make changes unless we're, as a public, asking them and demanding that they do that. So recognizing what those environmental impacts are in a contract language, in a paragraph or two, or as a list of other things that are problematic with chlorides, I think is a good way to, emphasize to the contractor why. It's not just we want you to do it because we want to save some money. There's other reasons as well.
And one last question for you, Jason. How is black ice handled in the period after the snow melts?
That would be something that you would need to do on a case-by-case basis. Typically, contractors that are responsible for properties are doing those reassessments the next day or following days for refreeze. And if it's extensive, then maybe that application is handled through one of those fixed prices in the contract. Oftentimes a contract will still, even if you have fixed prices for application rates, you might still have a time and materials costs in there, because you could have situations where you're just doing spot treatments for those that black ice. And one of the more innovative ways we're seeing those being handled is through direct liquid applications. So now we're coming back and we're treating those with the liquid brine like we do prior to a weather event, but we're doing that post-treatment instead of using extra granules. But again, that's something that that the contractor needs to do that on a small basis and get some experience with that before, just rolling it out everywhere, doing those kind of direct liquid applications. But that is one way we're seeing those kind of black ice situations being managed in a different manner.
And I'll add to what Jason said with that as well, that I think some of those black ice situations can be addressed ahead of winter weather conditions, preventing those situations from occurring by identifying things like where are your downspouts coming from. Is that something you can redirect so it's not going across a walk, like a pathway or across your parking lot, but instead maybe going into the grass. I just put in the chat, Bolton and Menk put out a low salt design guide. And so if you're looking at creating a new property, they have this guide that is sort of around winter infrastructure design, which is really
Hmm.
interesting. So identifying like where is the sun coming from? What direction is your doorway facing? Is that something where are your plants planted? Is it creating sort of a snow fence, or is it creating more of an issue where snow and ice doesn't melt because they're under the shade, or their parking lots or sidewalks are under the shade? So a really interesting sort of novel way to think about maintenance, ahead of all of that maintenance, even ahead of creating your building design, is designing for sort of smarter salt application just through the building design, which is really interesting. But I think
Good
even
idea.
more reason to do those site plans ahead of time, which you should be doing as property managers anyways, identifying these problem areas, areas that you can close off in the winter time, really being a little bit more in tune with your property, even more so than your winter maintenance professionals will be, before you have those meetings with those professionals to begin with. So,
Really good point, because those kind of situations, especially like runoff and refreeze from rain spouts or because of drainage on the property or where the snow was piled, they create situations where you have that black ice and where 85 or 90% of the rest of the property is clear and clean and safe. And then you just have those little spot and patchy areas. And that's what really can catch people off guard, because they're walking along and everything's fine. And then they hit these real problem areas. So really incumbent upon property managers to avoid those situations when they can, just through the kind of things Abby was talking about. Here at the building where I am, they have a real issue with roof just dripping off of the roof line right onto the sidewalk. All the snow can be completely melted, but if there's still some on the water on the roof, days later, cold nights, we end up with ice right out along that sidewalk, and it can catch you off guard for sure.
absolutely. Yeah, so coming up with some of these novel ways to reduce those issues from the get-go, are really important too. But it definitely takes
Absolutely.
all of us working together and having conversations. And like
Mhm.
Jason was saying, reevaluating your strategy, reevaluating your plan, having these evaluation meetings with your contractors, and doing this over and over and over again and seeing where the problem areas are, how can you improve your situation during the winter, making sure that you have some of this like trigger language where if we have these crazy storm events, you know exactly what's going to happen. And it's not just, oh, well, use your best judgment, and just really making sure that everybody's on the same page for what those expectations are in the winter time, are some of those things that will really help us create these wins at the end of the day. So, thank you so much, everyone, for attending and for sticking out here until the end. I know we're way over. And hopefully that this webinar has been really helpful to you. It is recorded and we will be putting this on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to check that out. It should be up probably by the end of the day today, if not early tomorrow. Um, so with that, Jason, I don't know if you have any final words to say, but thank you so much for all of your knowledge and insight and for being here and sharing all of that with us here today.
Happy to do so. It's why I took the job that I have. I really want to help the industry move forward in this direction. And I would just say one last word I would say is, you're not going to be able to do this overnight. Start small, start with the easy steps, and then over time, you can implement more and more of these strategies as you build that relationship with your contractor.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this webinar. Again, it will be recorded, so please feel free to check out the recording. So thank you again, and please salt responsibly.
Thank you.